Welcome to our morning show on women, wealth, and social change, where we are unpacking trends in philanthropy and impact investing, and really the opportunities we have today to do better and to really utilize our vast capital resources to unleash more social change in the world. We have a very exciting guest with us today, April Rinne.
Thank you, Alix. Happy to be here.
So excited for you to be here. As you know, we had the honor of meeting, my goodness, many moons ago when water.org was just launching. And since then, you've just gone on to do so many exciting things, including, advising industry leaders like Airbnb. You've really been a very big voice in terms of the future of work. And you just released a new book, FLUX, that is really so pertinent and relevant for what the world is going through today. And so tell us a little bit more about you and your journey, April.
Yeah, so thank you for having me today. And it is interesting when I hear you rattle off those different things. On the one hand, people are like, what do you do? They're like, you're a lawyer, you're an investor, you're a global development executive, you're an author, you're a yoga teacher. And all of those things are true. But at the same time, then they're like, well, what is it that you actually do? And we can come back to the book in a bit, but the book, which is FLUX, about how we navigate change as humans and humanity, it's the first time that I can say everything that I do is in this book, and everything that I care about doing moving forward is in this book as well. But it's a lot around system change. And so I think my story, I have a very international upbringing, not quite like yours, but that sense of diversity, and every human has an equal right to exist, an equal amount of dignity, that sort of thing has always played a really big role. And today I'm known mostly as a futurist, where I'm helping organizations understand where the future is heading and how their organization fits into it. And as part of that, and I say this, I can look back now and say it's been the last 30 years, but especially the last 10 years, where I've just been peeling back the layers of the onion around how our systems work, our financial system, our consumer culture system, our education system, our workplace infrastructure and system. And I just keep seeing how many disconnects there are, how poorly we have designed so many of our systems, not just for a world in flux and constant change, but for a world in which we actually can achieve equity, inclusion, equality. I mean, these are loaded terms. But, I think it's really fitting that we would be talking today, because I'm looking at what do we do in a world in constant change, but so much of what this comes back to is system design and how we rethink systemically the changes that need to happen. And that, those things play out individually, they play out organizationally, and of course they play out at the societal level as a whole.
Absolutely. And, you and I just caught up a few weeks ago, and there's something you shared with me that just really resonated with me, which is that our decisions around how capital will be utilized, how we can make social change really happen, those decisions continue to be filtered through outdated scripts, outdated systems that we know are no longer sustainable. I mean, I've had many of these conversations with impact investors, with philanthropists, both as someone who, was within a practitioner organization trying to raise this capital and make change happen, and both, also sitting within an organization in the past, at the World Bank, who had significant resources. And, we continue to see these changes happening at the edges of the industry, where there's great stories and inspirational things happening, but not at the mainstream level. And so, the big piece that I wanted to unpack with you today, knowing we only have 20 minutes, is what do you think needs to happen, April, for those decisions to be filtered through different mindsets, different systems, knowing that it is imperative that we use our vast capital resources differently today to make the change that we want to see in the world?
So there are a few different lenses. I'll try to keep this brief, and maybe I can share one and then we can kind of go back and forth a little bit. But there are a few different ways I think we can and should approach this issue, this hornet's nest, if you will, that you've just laid out. And I always like to go back, and this is, prior to the time that we met, but I'm trained as a lawyer, but I also have my degree in finance. And I was doing international financial markets work and capital markets and mainstream finance, but I had learned about microfinance. I had learned about small scale investing long before. Now, I was at graduate school doing a course on international capital markets, and I wanted to write my thesis basically on what was happening in Bolivia and Bangladesh and Kenya around small scale lending and savings. And I was told by my professor, and this is at Harvard, I'll just put that out there just for the record. They said, if it's not happening in London, New York, or Hong Kong, it's not international capital. It is not international capital markets. And I sat there and just went like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Now, I share this as one example. Now, to be fair, that same professor, about 10 years later, after Muhammad Yunus had won the Nobel Peace Prize for microfinance, et cetera, that same professor came back to me and said, oh, I see what you were doing. You want to come, teach a class on this space of microfinance and how it relates to international financial markets. So that story ended well. But what I want to tee up is the way that we think about not just finance, not just capital, but where matters, who's driving the global economy. That in and of itself is ready for a major upheaval. And I think some of that is happening. Obviously, the story I just discussed happened many, many years ago, but it really left a lasting impression in my mind of how outdated it is, how we think about where international finance is happening, where the global economy is growing, and who's driving it, right? I mean, it's not about, we'll come to this later, I think, but just systemic inequality is one thing where you have the 22 of the world's top billionaires own more financial wealth together than the bottom 4 billion people at the bottom of the pyramid of the poorest combined. Now, that is just woefully distorted. But what I want to be clear about is this is the result of the system we have designed. So some people would say this system is actually working very, very well because it was designed that way. It was designed for some people to have and others to have not. It was designed, and I'm all for meritocracy and working hard and all of that, but not allowing necessarily a floor, a minimum, and enough of dignity, income, etc. This is all system design though. And so part of what I think we can talk about is how do we redesign the system, and system in quotes, I guess you could say. But also, I guess I can tie this a little bit back to the book. What I find really interesting in terms of how we make these decisions, and back to what you were saying about the filters and the scripts, so much of what we have been taught, and I use the we collectively, each of us has been taught something a little bit differently, but on the whole, society today, we've been taught that more is better, that you're going to climb a corporate ladder, your career path is linear. We are told that money is a sign of how much you matter to society. We've been told that, what we see, what we measure are those things that can be measured in dollars and cents. We care about things like GDP and metrics that are very much monetarily oriented. And I'm not saying these things are bad, but what I'm saying is that is a very, very limited view of what the world needs and what we measure and what we value and, et cetera, et cetera. And we are right now, I think, in the early stages of a major shift in rethinking how does what we've been taught about the way the world works or should work, how does it match with how the world actually works? And a lot of people are saying, doesn't match up. Doesn't match up, and it's certainly not the kind of future I want to be part of or to help build. We have to start thinking differently. We have to start designing differently.
Absolutely. And there's so much of what you're sharing that I love, because it's also just really going to the source of the issue. I mean, we're beyond, beyond thinking about directing our vast capital resources to things that are doing good. We also have to think about how much of those resources are going to business models, a mindset, an approach, a system that's destroying the planet. It's destroying our health. It's destroying our way of living. And I totally agree with you. Of course, there's pockets of good. Of course, I'm with you when I've had this conversation, with friends who have a different political mindset. I said, I understand capitalism. I mean, there's a part of me that's absolutely for capitalism, but at the same time, we can't deny that the way the system has been designed and working is not sustainable, and it's not adding value for the planet and for our entire population. And so there's so much of that rethinking that needs to happen. And I think the piece that I would want to ask you is, do you think that by having more diverse women in positions that are pulling the purse strings, making decisions on capital, leadership across political systems, across different industries, can that be part of the big pivot? It's not the only thing that needs to happen, but can it be part of the big pivot that will lead to the kind of change that you were speaking about?
Absolutely. So in a way, like, that answer is super short. It's like a resounding, thundering yes. But I want to unpack a little bit more of what you were saying here in a couple different ways. So just like you, I am a fan of capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalist in any way, shape, or form. Capitalism as a concept is a good thing. We've seen it do a lot of good throughout history and for society and so forth. But capitalism is not one size fits all, and it's not one flavor or one degree. And the problem that we have right now is that the flavor, the shade, the degree to which capitalism is sort of free-flowing and rampant, if you will, in the world today, the flavor of capitalism, particularly in the US. I don't want to say this is the same, it's not one size fits all around the world, but particularly in the US, which is driving a lot of the conversations around global philanthropy these days, the flavor of capitalism that we have in the US today is toxic. It is bordering on so much danger, so much risk, but also so much just lack of dignity and humanity for so many people, that piece to really focus on. Not that capitalism is bad, but there's everything kind of in moderation. And we have gone wildly off track in terms of one extreme. I do want to bring up, though, also, if we want to kind of get more meta about this, at the end of the day, capitalism, money, whatever currency you want to, insert, these are all human-made creations.
Mm-hmm.
We designed it.
Right.
But to say that we somehow couldn't design something better, or that something's impossible, or like, why did we design capital? We now measure our sense of well-being, our value, our self-worth is deemed to be like, how big is your bank account, which to me is just wildly insane.
Yeah.
But we did this. This is not something, it's not a law of nature. It's not like a force of gravity. And so I really like to ask people to, like, start unpacking, if not capital, if capital is intended, or currency is intended to be a store of value, how might we better value what we really value?
Yeah.
Money is something we created. It's a figment of human, creativity. But to say that we can't do it better, we absolutely can. Because, and this is where it starts getting really interesting, where probably beyond the scope of today's conversation, but if not dollars and cents, you start getting into conversations about cryptocurrencies and other alternative currencies, but also you start looking at hyper-local currencies. You start looking at things that aren't traded on any market. And you start realizing there are lots of ways that we can make an economy grow and thrive. But also, key to your end mission, I think, is how do we help everyone meet their needs and reach their dreams and pursue their goals better?
Exactly. You nailed it. I mean, there's really two things that come to mind. One, again, love everything you're sharing, because I feel like many times, in my own journey, I've had people who ask, why did you pursue the journey of working for a social entrepreneur or, nonprofit, or, this work that we're doing to help address inequality? And I said, it's so rewarding to put your talents or your skills or your resources to work to create a better future, after a 14-hour day, when you see what a $12 million partnership can do for millions of people who need access to clean water. It's a very rewarding feeling. But also it's, wonderful to create a life where you have flexibility. So, I'm a huge creative, this, you're a gymnast, April, I'm a dancer. I need to dance. I need to express myself creatively. And it's really hard to do that, when you are working at a company and you're going to the office and you kind of have that traditional path. So we'll have to unpack this in another conversation, because there is a great article that speaks to this that was done by Harvard Business Review that is called The Art of Being a Late Bloomer, that speaks to, if you pursue a life that isn't just guided by this notion of, I got to have a lot of money in my bank account and this is all that matters, but you create these pockets in your journey that are open to exploration, creativity, and building yourself, your full self, and being vulnerable, you'll find so much more happiness. And that means making time for love and friendship and all of those important aspects of life. So we'll definitely have to keep chatting about this. But the other piece too is, it's so important that we create a society that truly is about removing barriers for people who have just really not been able to build the future they want because of the system that has been built, which at this point, it is a rigged system. I mean, it works very well for a few people at the top, and then it gets very difficult for everybody else. And it's even more difficult, for people who are living in poverty. And, this is really a big piece of the conversation around philanthropy and impact investing. How do we, across the board, create a system that has so much less bureaucracy, so much less decision makers? Is focused on doing. We've been doing decades of due diligence on organizations that are ready to scale their work and remove barriers for people living in poverty. And so, going from water.org to advising Airbnb to writing this book about FLUX, is there maybe one learning for you, April, or something that you'd want to share to someone who's listening to this and would aspire to really do something very meaningful with their philanthropy?
Yeah, well, I want to say not just with their philanthropy, but with their life.
Yeah.
And I want to tie, this to sound like it's about me, but it ties together what you were saying before, like, well, maybe we can talk about this later, with what you've just asked. Yeah. I need to tell this story, and I don't always tell it, but I think you know it. But here, so when it comes back to even just my career and how, and when I look at your career and people where it's like, there's a greater meaning or purpose for what I'm supposed to do on this, blue marble in my limited time. I was deeply, deeply affected by the fact that when I was 20, both of my parents died in a car accident. And I bring this up because I did not expect they would die. I had never experienced death, but I got a really big lesson in the fragility of life, how precious the little time we have here is, and how, I don't want to sound morbid, but like any of us could be gone tomorrow. Right. And at the age of 20, I had been raised in a family that valued diversity and valued, global citizenship, if you will, and valued education and didn't get hung up on how much money you had. Like, the values were there, but then all of a sudden, the people I thought were my sounding board and what I was supposed to do, like all of that just vanished. Right. And I had the equivalent, and I bring this up because I think you have lots of different demographics that listen to your show. I bring this up because I now see that I had the equivalent of a midlife crisis at the age of 20, because I was asking the same questions as a lot of people midlife. And here I will say, people with more assets, with more wealth, who are thinking about philanthropy, those are the questions they're asking. What am I supposed to do with my life? I've made money, but like, now how do I figure this out? And what was interesting is having that experience at age 20, not with a lot of money, but with the, I could die tomorrow, what should I do with my life? It became very clear to me, it is not just about making money. If I were to die tomorrow, would I feel as though I had made the world better for someone else? And I bring this up because that's what I hear you echoing in your sentiments as well. And I think more broadly, if everyone, and you can do it without tragedy, but if everyone could get better at asking themselves that question every single day, we would already be on our way to designing a better, healthier, more inclusive system and set of systems. And what's also interesting is never in my life, and this relates to my book and this relates to a lot of other stuff, never in my life have I heard somebody say on their deathbed, gosh, I wish I'd made more money. Gosh, I wish I hadn't given away so much money. Gosh, I wish I'd, really tried to climb that ladder even faster.
Yeah.
Never. And so it's that kind of, we can think of this as a mindset shift. I mean, there's lots of words we can use here, but that sense of if we can get off the hamster wheel and that series of, again, filters and norms and things we're taught by society about what makes us useful to the world, and recognize that we are so much more than dollars and cents. And there's something each and every one of us can do to chip in today to begin designing a different system that isn't so hung up on simply capital and isn't so hung up on, there's another question here about maintaining structures of inequality. Keep in mind, these structures were designed to be unequal. And there are some people who want to keep them unequal. And that doesn't even mean, that's not about being anti anything. That's just like, if the current system is benefiting you, why should you change it?
Exactly.
So there's a lot to pack in here, but that's kind of where I want to go back. Like, it's more a matter of what are the questions, what are the challenges we're setting for ourselves each day, what are the goals we're seeking to achieve? Because if your goal is to simply make more money in any given day, you're going to wind up really, really miserable at the end of your life, realizing that you didn't live your life according to the metrics that really mattered.
I love that. April, thank you so much. Everybody needs to read your book, FLUX. It's out. April is on her book tour. I can't wait to read it myself. It's definitely linked in many different ways to what we talked about today, and particularly in terms of how can you get the most out of life in pursuing that journey. And I just would say that you're such an inspirational speaker and a voice that needs to be part of this conversation. And I'm really grateful that you made time for us today, April.
Thank you so much. No, it's been my pleasure and a joy. And thank you for having me.
Thank you.